guys, and welcome along to another episode of Telecast PH, the Telework PH Business Process Outsourcing Podcast, changing the way we look at outsourcing to the Philippines. This is a podcast dedicated to breaking through the cultural barriers in outsourcing to the Philippines. Here you'll find some business advice from leaders in many different industries, some motivational and mindset content, and I'll show you the benefits of outsourcing some of the non-core aspects of your operations, like customer support or back office, and how outsourcing can open up a whole new world for your business. And in return, you'll be helping our mission to make an impact on poverty in the Philippines. I'm BizDev Jeff, your host. Thanks for joining, and as always, a special thank you to all who have been listening and following my content on LinkedIn and Instagram. So a few days ago, I had a great conversation with Glen and Shevelle Stephens. They're the owners of Revival Queen Bees in Alberta, Canada. I learned some fascinating facts about bees, queen bees especially, and the entire beekeeping and honey business. Now, here on Telecast PH, as I promised in the intro, I don't just talk about outsourcing, but we also offer the other value as well, and that's giving business advice from business owners, and mainly business owners that I meet on LinkedIn. So the key takeaways to the conversation that I had with them is how they risked everything to start their business and the steps they took to get their passion of reviving the beekeeping and honey industry in their area off the ground. They left their jobs behind and endured losses and quite a few struggles, including a bee sting allergy that could have potentially shut them down for good. And they also gave some great advice for small business owners who are struggling and facing hard times during this pandemic. So if you're a business owner or thinking about taking that leap, you'll definitely get value from this conversation. Let's listen in. Hey guys, welcome along to Telecast PH. We have beekeeper and honey experts and owners of Revival Queen Bee Sales, Shevelle and Glen Stephens. Hey guys, welcome to Telecast PH. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks very much for having us. We're really excited to sit down and chat with you.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Awesome. Hey, so to start off, what's the story behind the name? Because I find that name, Revival, quite unique, actually. Is there any particular reason for Revival?
So we actually recently went through a rebrand. We started our company about 3 years ago, and at the time we had called it Koha Apiaries because Koha is a New Zealand word. It means gift, and Glen is from New Zealand. But we learned our very first lesson very quickly, which was you should pick a name that people could spell, pronounce, and remember. So we went a couple years with people kind of having trouble tracking us down because the name wasn't sticking for them. It was a foreign word, and they were also terrified to pronounce it. So once we realized that we had considered doing a rebrand, and we chose a time when we were transitioning the business itself to focus more on breeding queen bees. So in Alberta, there is a lack of locally bred queen bees available for local hives. And that's a problem because you want stock that's bred in your local area so that it's adapted to the environmental conditions.
Right.
And most of our queens are coming in from Hawaii and California. Where we live in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, it's very cold. And so we need bees that have survived the winter, that have dealt with our pests, and that have kind of learned or that have adapted to our conditions. So we made it our mission to start producing more queen bees to help out local beekeepers. And part of that is about reviving our local industry. And so that's kind of how Revival was born. It was just an indication to local beekeeping industry that we wanted to make a difference, and we were going to do that with breeding queen bees.
That's interesting. So when you say like adapting, does that include like the pollen that is in your area? I mean, do bees that like come from other areas, like say California, like you mentioned, and then they come to your area, do they, do they have trouble adapting to the different flowers and the different plants that are around?
Oh, bees themselves are fairly adaptable as far as food and forage sources go. Like they're pretty good at finding new sources and exploiting them. But more the adaptations really come in a genetic standpoint from, it's mostly the overwintering that we're concerned about here in Edmonton, because the where they breed the queens in California and Hawaii, they don't have that selective pressure for overwintering. So it's kind of it's a bit of a random chance whether or not you're going to get a queen that has the genetic propensity for good wintering. Whereas if we breed them where there is that selective pressure, then it's more likely that we'll pass that genetic information on.
Yeah, and so basically, if we wait to see which of our hives get through the winter and we breed from them, we know that there's a chance they have genetics that are well suited to the cold weather.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So that, when you import those bees in that first cold snap, it's kind of a shock to them because they're not prepared for that. And then you find the strongest ones and then breed from there and sell them locally.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, all bees will survive some cold. They're pretty good at that, but it's the length and the extreme cold that we have here for our winters that's the killer.
Now, forgive my ignorance, my bee ignorance. Do bees? I mean, do they hibernate? What do they do in the winter when there's no vegetation? Do they stay active? I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, they kind of do, but they kind of don't. So what they do is they stop raising new bees, and that reduces their metabolic needs significantly. And then they cluster together and take turns being on the outside, and they use their bodies as insulation. And they shiver to keep warm. They keep the inside of the cluster about 25 degrees Celsius, which is, I think, somewhere in the 70s or 80s Fahrenheit. And the outside will be fairly cool, like fridge temperature. And they take turns being on the outside, and they work their way through the hive eating their stored honey.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you know anything about penguins. So penguins huddle together, and then they take turns being on the outside and inside as well.
That's fascinating. It really is. I don't know much about bees. I have watched some documentaries, and thank you for enlightening me, because I mean, I probably have a million questions. For instance, now I saw somewhere in a documentary one time that bees communicate by vibrating and wiggling, and they go through, and then that's how that they communicate with the other members of the hive. Is that correct?
That's one of the communication pathways they have, especially when they're talking about or trying to communicate where forage is available. They have special dances depending on how far away the forage is and what kind of forage. And they also communicate with pheromones inside the hive. But yeah, pheromones and dance are the two main ways that they communicate.
That's incredible. It really is. That's blowing me away. So
yeah, they're pretty amazing. They're pretty amazing creatures, and not a lot of people know much about them, unfortunately. So we try to change that wherever we can.
Well, so like I had told you before, Shevelle, I don't know if you recall, my son is heavily into insects, spiders mainly. And then when I was on LinkedIn, I was looking at one of your posts, some of your content there, and he saw that. And you had a picture of bees on there, and he was just, I said, well, that's a connection of mine on LinkedIn. And she's, sells queen bees. And he's like, I want one. I want a queen bee. I mean, he's going to be 9 tomorrow, as a matter of fact, but,
yeah, kids, even if kids are scared of bees, we found that once we get them out to the hive, if we dress them up and just kind of take it slow, they're easily fascinated by them. It's just like, it's a completely new experience for them and something they've never seen before. And there's so many good stories that we can tell to the kids. And it's the same stories amaze adults as well. The whole bee world is almost magical. And it's really, really fun being able to teach kids about them.
The ridiculous thing about bees also is the more you get to know, the more ridiculous things you get to learn. Like, we haven't got enough time to even scratch the surface about how crazy these creatures are.
Oh, I can imagine it. And I mean, that's great to hear that people have good experiences with contact with bees. I've never had any good experiences when I, came into contact with a bee,
Right.
in the past. So now, Glenn, you're from New Zealand,
Yep,
and you're both biologists, right?
that's correct.
I
Yeah.
saw on your LinkedIn profile that you're, was it a family business? You grew up raising queen bees in New Zealand?
Yeah, that's right. My parents were commercial queen breeders, just like I am now. That was their main gig. Unfortunately, my dad had to give it up when I was a teenager because he developed an allergy. But my mum continued with it, and she still does it to this day. So
Now, that's one thing I have heard is that bee sting allergies are, instead of building up a tolerance, it goes the opposite way. The more you get stung, the more sensitive you become to I guess it's a toxin that they inject with, a tiny bit. Is that correct?
Yeah, and so what happens is it can actually go either way. So some people will seemingly develop a tolerance, but some people will slowly get worse, or all of a sudden one day you do hear stories about beekeepers who were fine, and then one day they had a severe reaction. And in terms of allergies, that's definitely something that I have a lot of experience with, because I actually was one of the beekeepers that developed an allergy. So over time, I just noticed the stings that I was getting were getting worse. And then one day I had a fairly concerning reaction. So got a test and found out that I had developed an allergy. And then, like a fool, I turned to Google and Facebook groups to tell me what I should do. And you kind of, Dr. Google is
Oh
never
yeah.
all. And a lot of beekeepers had said that they developed allergies and that was the end of their career. And it's kind of something that's not talked a lot about in the beekeeping world, because people don't realize that there's actually a therapy for it. So it is, some beekeepers kind of keep it a secret because they don't want anybody to know it, but they don't want to give up their livelihood either. So one of the things that I like to do a couple times a year is post about the fact that there is a therapy that is highly effective. And you don't need to quit beekeeping necessarily just because you're allergic. With medical intervention and EpiPens, chances are you can keep going, but you should always talk to your doctor. And there's therapy. The therapy is a bit of a commitment. It was 3.5 months. I had to go once a week to get injected with bee venom. We have increasing concentration. And then for the next 3 years, you go once a month just to kind of get a booster, I guess you would call it.
Right. So that really doesn't need to be a showstopper.
No.
If you're dedicated enough and you've made this your life, then there is that therapy. Because I did see on your TikTok, you had put out a video that you had both been stung like 300 times each. Was it? I forget the actual number.
we both we estimated that we came in around that number, but considering we are around millions and millions of bees every day, that's not too bad of a number to have been stung a couple hundred times. The bees are gentle, at least where we are, and they typically only sting you if they feel threatened. So if you're about to squish them, and there are certain times of year where they are a little bit more temperamental as well, but we can see that coming and we can prepare for it just by making sure we're a little more methodical with our actions, and that we kind of gear up a little bit more than we usually do. But yeah, being stung is 100% part of being a beekeeper. That's one of our most common questions. If I become a beekeeper, am I going to get stung? The answer is yes. You cannot avoid it. So you should be safe. And it is recommended that anyone who keeps bees, even if they aren't allergic, that they do purchase and keep an EpiPen with them at all times, because of those stories where all of a sudden you're not fine when you were fine last time. That's probably number one tip, is carry an EpiPen with you no matter what.
Makes sense. I mean, so bees really, they don't want to sting you. I mean,
No.
if they get into your house, it's a mistake. They don't want to be in there. I mean,
Exactly. And with honeybees, they will die after they sting you. So it really is just a defense mechanism for them. And if you take a beekeeping course, they will teach you kind of like what gear you can wear and how you can act around the bees to make sure that you're treating them with the respect that they need. And then typically they'll be totally fine back to you as well.
So Glenn, was it your background then that kept you fascinated and wanted to go into this business? I mean, because I was wondering, what made you say one day, hey, let's be beekeepers? What was it, that background, that love for bees?
That's a really good question. I asked myself that sometimes too. So it was, we were biologists in the oil and gas industry, and that had a bit of a downturn. So we were looking for alternatives, and I did a little bit of research after I moved to Alberta, and it turns out that the beekeeping industry here is thriving. So it kind of just seemed to fit. I had the experience already, and we were in a good place to do it. So it just kind of made sense.
And I had always wanted to own my own business. So we kind of sat down, after the downturn, at a difficult part of our life, and just realized that, we need to do something that speaks more to who we are and something that will make us happier. So it totally made sense. We were both biologists. Glenn had the beekeeping background. I really wanted to try running my own business, and Alberta was a great place for it. So it's just immediately it clicked.
So what were those early years like? Or, how long have you been in business?
So our first year, although Glenn knew how to keep bees, he had never kept them in Canada before. So our first year was a complete trial. We got a handful of hives and just kind of waited to see how things went. He also had never overwintered bees. So it was a good thing we did that, because that was a really bad year. We were not prepared for mostly how intense the summer was. There's a lot of nectar in Alberta, so the bees can produce a lot of honey. But the problem with that is that means they fill up the hive really quickly. And if you're not on top of it and you're not expanding their hive as they need you to, they will actually swarm, which essentially means a big chunk of them leave and they take a bunch of honey with them. So literally hundreds and hundreds of dollars just flies out of the hive. And all of our hives, except for one, swarmed that year. So if we had hives on the scale that we had now, that would have been financially devastating. And then I think after that, we're about 3 years in after that initial year.
You had made a post on LinkedIn. I saw that the frames were like stacked up and everywhere. And you had said there was just little small aisles to get through. So there was a lot of sacrifice and struggle to get started.
Yeah, so because when we first started our business, when we did that trial year, we actually were both out of work and we were living in my parents' house. So we had no money, and we had to make sure that what we were doing wasn't going to ultimately harm us in the long run. So we kind of had to put in a lot of sweat equity and grow slowly, just to make sure that we could still live and that we could continue to grow the business. And then when we eventually, shortly after, moved out of my parents' house and we moved into a townhouse. And for some reason, we just didn't think that it would be a problem trying to farm from a townhouse, but it 100% was. So beekeeping is really equipment heavy. There's so much woodwork that needs to be done, so much equipment and a lot of supplies. And it didn't take long for that to completely fill up our house. We were woodworking in the backyard of the townhouse. We were terrible neighbors, days and days.
Yeah, the living room wasn't a living room for a lot of the time. It was mostly a workshop. There was sawdust everywhere, and we had things stacked on the couch. We had aisles to walk through so that you could get from one room to the other, but everything else was just stacks of equipment.
Yeah, and every once in a while you go through the living room and you have to wipe everything down because it's covered in a layer of sawdust. And we were thankfully renting that place. Not so good for the landlord, maybe, but the floors in the basement, we had thousands of pounds of stuff stacked all over them. So we took care of them, but it did create wear and tear on the house, and definitely wear and tear on us mentally. Living in basically a workshop is very difficult, but we stuck with it. And as we started growing, we kind of figured out how to make things logistically a little bit easier. But it wasn't until last year that we finally moved everything out to farm acreage, and everything just was a lot easier since then. But to be able to afford that property, we did have to basically trade our time so that we could save money. So the first couple of years of our business, we were definitely a put in the time to save money kind of strategy.
So I bet when you would look at that, you knew that you had reached a point of no return. That there was no more looking back, that you had to move forward. I'm certain there were times when you just were like, screw this, we got to quit.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And there are, because we were making these big jumps, it was every time we really had to sit down and just make sure that, is this what we want? We're about to completely overhaul our entire life for this business, but it is what we want. And, I think because we have the passion and the knowledge, and because we did take it so slow, that's one of the reasons that we've been able to be successful up to this point. But you really do got to keep yourself in check when all of a sudden, you're about to use your house as a storage shop. You got to make sure that you love it. That's for sure.
And you didn't take on any investors or anything. You did it all yourself. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, we're 100% self-funded, and as Shevelle said, mostly from sweat equity. We put in a lot of time.
That's rough. I can just imagine. Now, I've done some of vermiculture in the past, and I've thought about doing it again. I really don't have the room or the space or the time to dedicate, to the worms, because it's got to be similar with bees. You got to keep a proper temperature. You got to keep a proper moisture. You got to, worms are probably a little bit easier, probably a lot easier to take care of than bees, because, well, they don't go anywhere and you just throw your garbage in there. But dealing with live creatures, there's still a lot of responsibility and probably more risk, than say like an SaaS company, where if something breaks, the developers swing into action and fix it.
Absolutely. Right now, this time of year, I'm keeping an eye on the weather forecast very, very closely, because as soon as it warms up, we need to get in there, and we need to make sure they have enough feed, make sure they don't need medicating, because it is a matter of life or death for them. If we don't treat them right, then they could perish. And
yeah, they're not on our schedule. We are entirely on their schedule.
I guess it would be difficult to adapt bees to, follow your schedule and what you have to do when you want to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's absolutely impossible. We are 100% run on what they need, and we're reacting to what they need rather than telling them, because that just doesn't work.
So now, talking about the core of your business, are the queen bees, selling the queen bees, the core of the business, or is it the honey and the cider? I think I forgot to mention that you also do cider and mead. But what is the biggest generator for you?
The queen bees are definitely the biggest generator for us. As far as the business goes, we sell queen bees to beekeepers, and we sell honey to the public at farmers markets. The cider and mead is definitely a hobby side hobby for us.
It's something that we're developing in the background. We don't sell yet, but we are hoping to in the future.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, well, that's an amazing idea that a lot of business owners do, is, have multiple sources of income. I know Warren Buffett talks about that all the time. But about the queen bees themselves, now, do you get like repeat business from beekeepers? I have no idea what the lifespan of a queen would be. So when a queen passes away, or, her time is up, do they purchase a new queen? How does that work?
Yeah, so the majority of our business is repeat customers. Most beekeepers will replace their queens either once every year or once every 2 years, because a young queen will perform better and they'll get better honey yields. So the majority of our business is repeat customers, because they need to keep buying queens.
Now, your business is completely local, completely Alberta, because of all the documents and the permits and whatnot. So let's go ahead and talk about what's on the lips and minds of every small business owner, and those like yourselves who have a predominantly local customer base, and that's the COVID-19 outbreak. How has this affected you?
So the coronavirus outbreak is is going to be potentially a huge challenge for beekeepers all over North America. There are a couple things that we've learned about in the last couple days actually. So a lot of farms, including beekeepers, will bring in seasonal workers to help out on the farm. And for a while, it was looking like they might not be allowed into North America, but at least into Canada, they have been given an exception. But the problem is there aren't necessarily enough flights to get them here. So a lot of beekeepers are going to be struggling to maintain the size of operation that they have right now. Normally they could bring in like 20 workers, and now it's just going to be kind of them and their family. So there's a lot of concern about what that's going to do to the businesses here. And I'm sure a lot of other types of farmers have the same concern. Now, we don't use seasonal workers at this stage, but of course, anything that affects the other members of our industry will ultimately affect us as well. So we did have to start kind of looking at how can we make up some of the potential losses that we're going to have. And although we had in recent years focused a lot less on honey, we decided that honey sales with free delivery right now would be one way that we could help our community and also help ourselves. So that has been responded to very well. We get lots of messages from people in the community who are thankful because they're in isolation, so we can drop off on their porch. And as well, it keeps them out of the stores. And where the point that we're at with the virus right now is we are being strongly recommended to stay home. A lot of people are working from home, but that's still fairly relaxed. I suspect that's going to change rapidly. But for now, I think anyone who can offer a product that is truly beneficial to their customers will also help them. And I think from what I've been noticing, I've been spending a lot of time looking at what customers are saying. It definitely will get you far if it looks like you're trying to help the community. And so that's something that every move we make right now, we're trying to think, okay, what can we do that will also help our industry or will also help our customers? Now, the other problem that we have is that every year North America imports a lot of actual beehives from
New Zealand and Australia, package bees.
Yeah, and so that's to kind of help them replace their winter losses. So if your hives die, you can buy new ones and kind of replace them to get you back up to where you were, or to help you grow your operation. And those look like they're probably not coming because the planes need to be pressurized.
That's right. Yeah, the planes need to be pressurized as if they are carrying passengers. And right now, the only planes that are leaving New Zealand at least, will be cargo planes, which are unpressurized, and the bees will die.
Yeah. So
well, that makes sense. Yeah, because that was actually going to be my next question. I was, I was wondering how do they transport? Because I was thinking cargo, and I'm like, how would they transport? Because I know it gets very cold up there in the sky. So
yeah, it does. So the bees come in a screened box, and it's literally just a kilogram of bees in a box with some feed to keep them going. They can stay in their box for probably a week or so, but they do need to be kept relatively cool. Like fridge temperature again is good for them, and but those cargo planes get very cold, so that would be too cold for them.
Yeah, so it's we just got news of this actually a couple of days ago, so we're still working out what we're going to do about that, and I'm sure a lot of people in the industry are. But it's definitely going to be a year where we all need to kind of step up and help each other, because it's, whatever's not good for the beekeepers is also not good for the bees. So if we can't get local people to help at the apiaries, there will be some hives that are neglected, and we definitely don't want that. So I think once the storm calms down a little bit here, we're going to be chatting with other beekeepers to figure out how we can come together at this time.
So that's amazing. So you are already looking ahead to a post-outbreak solutions of what, ways you can go and looking at ways to make things better in the future.
Yeah, we have to, because, the bees don't wait for us. So we're going to have to go ahead anyways. We're days away from starting beekeeping season here. So we essentially just need to figure it out. The other issue is that a lot of the new beekeepers are depending on their beekeeper clubs to kind of teach them throughout the season what they should be doing to be able to ask their questions. So we have recently opened up free Q&A sessions with us for beekeepers in Alberta or surrounding areas. Spring can be a pretty tricky time for hive management, and we want to make sure that all the beekeepers that are new or uncertain have the support they need. So we do have some capacity to kind of mentor beekeepers who are in need of it.
Now, as far as like being the small local business, what advice would you give to others who may be in a similar situation? Just like 1 or 2 sentences. What would you say to them to keep them going? Because I know a lot of people are getting discouraged with what's going on. People are losing money, businesses are losing money, people are losing jobs. What would you like to say?
What I'd like to say, there's a lot, but at this point, I think take some time to kind of process what's happening and to really think through carefully kind of the different paths that you can take. Get creative and maybe even team up with people in your industry or outside of your industry. You can collaborate, see how you can support each other. But above all, really think about how you can bring value to the people in your community. People are scared right now, and we see that. I'm getting, based on the correspondence that I'm having with my customers, people are having a hard time even remembering that they've ordered anything from us. They're having a hard time remembering what the delivery date was. And so we need to be patient with people, and we need to listen to them. And a good way to listen to them is to go on social media. And where we're hanging out right now is Facebook, of all places, which we had largely stopped hanging out on because that's where people seem to be, at least people that we need to talk to, where they're expressing their concerns. And so if we know what is upsetting them, we have a chance of helping them through it. And I think bringing value and just being creative and kind of weathering the storm in that way is what I would recommend for at least people in our industry.
And it seems like the overall theme of what you just said is listen to your customers. Listen to what they're saying.
I was just about to jump in there and reiterate that. Like I've had a lot of a few commercial beekeepers call me and voice their concerns, and I'm taking their concerns in and processing it, trying to figure out how I can help them and make this situation better for everyone.
So now, if somebody in the Alberta area wants to get a hold of you and talk to you about maybe purchasing some honey or whatever, how can they get a hold of you? Do you have a Facebook or a website you want to tell them about?
Yeah, our website is definitely the best place to go. It is revivalqueenbees.com. It's pretty easy to remember.
Yeah, and we've also got social media, Revival Queen Bees on Instagram, Twitter, which we don't use very often, and Facebook. And if you're looking for a little bit of entertainment or you just want to learn a little bit about bees and beekeeping, you can also find us on TikTok under Alberta Beekeeping. A little bit of a different side of us, but a little bit of a happy break, I think, from the current events. So yeah, you can find us at any of those places.
And I can attest to your videos on TikTok, as I've seen that last one you put out where you're running through the store to give the local honey was hilarious. So I'm gonna put the links in the description for the podcast so that people can easily just click and find you.
Great.
Thank you very much for being here. Your advice has been great, not only for beekeepers, but for other people who have small businesses, and businesses that cater to a local community who may be scared. Hopefully what you've said and your advice will give them more direction or some inspiration.
I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so too. And thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's been awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff.
All not a problem. And thanks again. And we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds great. Have a good weekend.
Right. So that will wrap it up for this installment of Telecast PH. I've been BizDev Jeff. Thanks again to Glen and Shevelle Stephens for joining me today. If you like this podcast, Please go ahead and subscribe. And if you're on the YouTube channel, I'd really appreciate it if you would like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you'll be notified when I upload new content. I have some amazing guests lined up that I'm certain you're not going to want to miss. And I'm always looking for great feedback, so comments are always welcome. And of course, if you want to find out more about Telework PH and how we can help your business scale up through outsourcing to the Philippines, all you got to do is hop on over to www.teleworkph.com or hit me up in LinkedIn. Just search BizDev Jeff Thompson or the hashtag BizDevJeff. And as the late, great Dr. Wayne Dyer said, in a world where you can be anything, be kind. Take care, everyone. Be safe. This is BizDev Jeff, signing off.